Good evening, and welcome back to Footnotes Folly. I am Professor Reginald St. John Pemberton, and we return to the great work of Flavius Josephus, the Antiquities of the Jews. Book 12 ended with Judas Maccabeus dead on the field. Tonight we open Book 13, The Rise of the Hasmonean Dynasty, and we give it complete, in plain modern English, from Whiston's grand all-public domain translation. The plain rendering and the asides are my own. This is Book 13, Part 1. Judas's brother Jonathan takes up the cause, and discovers a new weapon, not the sword alone, but the chaos of Syrian politics. As rival kings Demetrius and the pretender Alexander Bala tear the Seleucid Empire apart, each one bids higher for Jonathan's friendship, until this guerrilla leader of a hill country revolt is made high priest, clothed in royal purple, and courted like a king. We will follow the dizzying turns of those alliances, and watch Judea grow strong in the gaps between its enemies. Let us begin.
The earlier book has already told how the Jewish nation regained its freedom after being enslaved by the Macedonians, and what struggles and great battles Judas, the commander of their army, endured until he was killed while fighting for them. After his death, however, all the wicked men, and all those who had broken the laws of their ancestors, rose up again in Judea. They grew stronger and pressed the people on every side. A famine added to their wickedness and brought suffering on the country, until many people, lacking necessities and unable to endure the misery brought on them by both the famine and their enemies, left their own country and went over to the Macedonians. Bacchides then gathered together those Jews who had abandoned the traditional way of life of their ancestors and had chosen to live like their neighbors. He entrusted the country to them. They seized the friends of Judas and those who belonged to his party, and handed them over to Bacchides. He first tortured and tormented them as he pleased, and then finally killed them. This disaster became so great for the Jews that they had experienced nothing like it since their return from Babylon. When the remaining companions of Judas saw that the nation was in danger of being destroyed in a miserable way, they came to Judas's brother Jonathan. They asked him to imitate his brother and to show the same care for his countrymen, for whose common liberty Judas had died. They begged him not to allow the nation to be left without a leader, especially in the destructive circumstances in which it now found itself. Jonathan said that he was ready to die for them, and that he considered himself no less devoted than his brother. So he was appointed commander of the Jewish army. When Bacchides heard this, he feared that Jonathan might become as troublesome to the king and the Macedonians as Judas had been before him, so he looked for a way to kill him by treachery. But Jonathan and his brother Simon learned of his plan. Once they knew it, they took all their companions, and immediately fled into the wilderness nearest the city. When they reached a lake called Asphar, they stayed there. Bacchides realized that they were in a weak condition, and had taken refuge in that place, so he hurried to attack them with all his forces. He pitched his camp beyond Jordan and strengthened his army. When Jonathan learned that Bacchides was coming against him, he sent his brother John, who was also called Gades, to the Nabatean Arabs, so that John could leave their baggage with them until the battle with Bacchides was over, since they were friends of the Jews. The sons of Ambri laid an ambush for John from the city Medaba. They seized him and those who were with him, plundered everything they had, and killed John and all his companions. Yet they were fully punished for this by John's brothers, as will be told shortly. When Bacchides learned that Jonathan had pitched his camp among the lakes of Jordan, he waited until their Sabbath day, and then attacked him, supposing that Jonathan would not fight because the law required rest on that day. But Jonathan urged his companions to fight and told them that their lives were at stake. They were surrounded by the river and by their enemies, with no way to escape. The enemy pressed them from the front, and the river lay behind them. After praying to God to grant them victory, he joined battle with the enemy and struck down many of them. When he saw Bacchides coming boldly toward him, Jonathan stretched out his right hand to strike him. Bacchides foresaw the blow and avoided it. Then Jonathan and his companions leaped into the river, swam across, and escaped beyond Jordan, while the enemy did not cross the river. Bacchides soon returned to the citadel at Jerusalem, having lost about 2,000 men from his army. Bacchides also fortified many cities of Judea whose walls had been torn down: Jericho, Maus Bet-Boran, Bethel Timah, Pharetho Tekoa, and Gazara. In each of these cities he built towers, surrounded them with strong and very large walls, and placed garrisons in them so that the soldiers could come out and harm the Jews. He fortified the citadel at Jerusalem more strongly than all the others. He also took the sons of the leading Jews as hostages, shut them up in the citadel, and guarded it in that way. Around the same time, someone came to Jonathan and his brother Simon and told them that the sons of Ambri were celebrating a wedding. They were bringing the bride from the city Gabbatha, a daughter of one of the distinguished men among the Arabians, and the young woman was being escorted with ceremony, splendor, and great wealth. Jonathan and Simon thought this was the best time to avenge their brother's death, and believed they had enough forces to exact satisfaction for it. So they hurried to Medaba and lay in wait in the mountains for their enemies to come. As soon as they saw the virgin, her bridegroom, and the large company of friends that could be expected at such a wedding, they rushed out from their ambush. They killed them all, took their ornaments and all the plunder that accompanied them, and then returned. In this way they obtained satisfaction from the sons of Ambri for their brother John. The sons themselves, along with their friends, wives, and children who followed them, all perished, about 400 people in all. Simon and Jonathan then returned to the lakes of the river and stayed there. Bacchides, after he had secured all Judea with his garrisons, returned to the king. The affairs of Judea remained quiet for 2 years. But when the deserters and the wicked saw that Jonathan and those with him were living very quietly in the country because of the peace, they sent word to King Demetrius and urged him to send Bacchides to seize Jonathan. They said this could be done without difficulty and in a single night, and that if they attacked before Jonathan's men were aware of it, they could kill them all. So the king sent Bacchides. When Bacchides came into Judea, he wrote to all his friends, both Jews and auxiliaries, ordering them to seize Jonathan and bring him to him. But despite all their efforts, they could not seize Jonathan, because he understood the traps they had set for him and guarded carefully against them. Bacchides grew angry at these deserters, because they had deceived both him and the king, and he killed 50 of their leaders. Out of fear of Bacchides, Jonathan, his brother, and those with him withdrew to Bethagla, a village in the wilderness. Jonathan built towers there, surrounded the place with walls, and made sure it was safely guarded. When Bacchides heard this, he brought his own army, added his Jewish auxiliaries, came against Jonathan, attacked his fortifications, and besieged him for many days. But Jonathan did not lose courage because of the energy Bacchides showed in the siege. He resisted him bravely. Leaving his brother Simon in the city to fight Bacchides, Jonathan secretly went out into the country, gathered a large force from his own party, and attacked Bacchides' camp at night, destroying many of them. His brother Simon learned of Jonathan's attack when he saw that the enemy were being killed by him. Simon then rushed out against them, burned the engines the Macedonians were using, and slaughtered many of them. When Bacchides saw himself surrounded by enemies, with some before him and some behind him, he fell into despair and mental distress, stunned by the unexpected failure of the siege. Yet he poured out his anger over these misfortunes on the deserters who had summoned him from the king, because they had misled him. He therefore wanted, if possible, to bring the siege to a respectable close and then return home. When Jonathan understood Bacchides' intentions, he sent ambassadors to him to propose a treaty of friendship and mutual assistance, and to arrange for both sides to restore the captives they had taken. Bacchides thought this offered a fairly honorable way to withdraw, so he made a treaty of friendship with Jonathan. They swore that they would no longer make war against one another. Accordingly, Bacchides restored the captives, took his own men with him, and returned to the king at Antioch. After this departure, he never came into Judea again. Jonathan then took advantage of this quiet state of affairs, and went to live in the city Michmash. There he governed the people, punished the wicked and ungodly, and in this way cleansed the nation of them. In the 160th year, Alexander, the son of Antiochus Epiphanes, came up into Syria and captured Ptolemy, because the soldiers inside betrayed the city to him. They were hostile to Demetrius because of his arrogance and because he was so hard to approach. He had shut himself up in a palace not far from Antioch, a palace with 4 towers that he had built for himself, and he admitted no one to see him. He was also lazy and careless in public affairs, which made his subjects hate him even more, as we have already related elsewhere. When Demetrius heard that Alexander was in Ptolemy, he took his whole army and marched against him. He also sent ambassadors to Jonathan to make a league of mutual assistance and friendship. He wanted to act before Alexander did, fearing that Alexander might first make an agreement with Jonathan and gain his support. Demetrius was afraid that Jonathan would remember how badly Demetrius had treated him before and would join Alexander in the war against him. So Demetrius ordered that Jonathan be allowed to raise an army, have weapons made, and receive back the Jewish hostages whom Bacchides had shut up in the citadel of Jerusalem. When this good fortune came to Jonathan through Demetrius's concession, Jonathan went to Jerusalem and read the king's letter publicly before the people and before those who guarded the citadel. When the letter was read, the wicked men and deserters in the citadel became very afraid, because the king had given Jonathan permission to raise an army and receive back the hostages. Jonathan returned each hostage to his own parents. He then made his home in Jerusalem, improved the condition of the city, and restored the buildings as he thought best. He ordered the city walls to be rebuilt with squared stones, so that it would be more secure against its enemies. When the men who guarded the garrisons in Judea saw this, they all abandoned them and fled to Antioch, except those in the city of Bethsura and those in the citadel of Jerusalem. Most of these were wicked Jews and deserters, and for that reason they did not give up their garrisons. When Alexander learned what promises Demetrius had made to Jonathan, and also learned of Jonathan's courage, the great things he had done in fighting the Macedonians, and the hardships he had suffered because of Demetrius and Bacchides, the general of Demetrius's army, he told his friends that he could find no one at that time who could help him better than Jonathan. Jonathan was brave against his enemies, and had a special hatred for Demetrius, since he had both suffered many harsh things from him, and done many harsh things against him. Therefore, if they thought it wise to make Jonathan their friend against Demetrius, it would be more to their advantage to invite him to help them now than at any other time. So Alexander and his friends decided to send to Jonathan, and Alexander wrote him this letter. King Alexander sends greetings to his brother Jonathan. We have long heard of your courage and your faithfulness, and for that reason we have sent to you, so that we may make a league of friendship and mutual assistance with you. Therefore we appoint you this day as high priest of the Jews, and we order that you be called my friend. I have also sent you a purple robe and a golden crown as gifts, and I ask that, now that you have been honored by us, you will also show the same respect to us." When Jonathan received this letter, he put on the high priestly robe at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, 4 years after the death of his brother Judas. Until then, no high priest had been appointed. He then raised large forces, and had a great quantity of weapons prepared. When Demetrius heard this, he was deeply grieved and blamed himself for being slow, because he had not acted before Alexander and gained Jonathan's goodwill, but had given Alexander time to do so. Nevertheless, Demetrius also wrote a letter of his own to Jonathan and to the people. This was its contents. King Demetrius sends greetings to Jonathan and to the nation of the Jews. Since you have kept your friendship with us, and when you were tempted by our enemies you did not join them, I commend you for this faithfulness and urge you to continue in the same disposition. For this you shall be repaid and receive rewards from us. I will free you from the greater part of the tributes and taxes that you formerly paid to the kings my predecessors and to myself. I now release you from the tributes you have always paid. Besides this, I forgive you the tax on salt, and the value of the crowns you used to offer me. Instead of taking the third part of the fruits of the field and half the fruits of the trees, I give up my share of them from this day forward. As for the poll money that ought to be paid to me for every head among the inhabitants of Judea, and of the 3 toparchies adjoining Judea, Samaria, Galilee, and Peers, I release it to you both for the present and for all time to come. I also will that the city of Jerusalem be holy and inviolable, and free from the tithe and the taxes, to its farthest boundaries. I give up so much of my claim to the citadel that I permit Jonathan, your high priest, to possess it, so that he may place in it whatever garrison he approves as faithful and well disposed toward himself, so they may keep it for us. I also set free all Jews who have been made captives and slaves in my kingdom. I order that the animals of the Jews not be taken for our service. Let their Sabbaths, all their festivals, and the 3 days before each festival be free from every imposition. In the same way, I set free the Jews who live in my kingdom in order that no injury be done to them. I also give permission for any of them who wish to enlist in my army to do so, up to 30,000 men. These Jewish soldiers, wherever they go, shall receive the same pay as my own army. I will place some of them in my garrisons, and some as guards around my own person, and as rulers over those who are in my court. I also give them permission to use and observe the laws of their forefathers. I will that they have authority over the 3 toparchies added to Judea. It shall be in the power of the high priest to make sure that no Jew has any other temple for worship except the one at Jerusalem. I also grant for my own revenues, each year, 150,000 drachmae for the expenses of the sacrifices, and whatever money is left over shall be your own. I also release to you the 10,000 drachmae that the kings receive from the temple, because they belong to the priests who serve in that temple. Whoever flees to the temple at Jerusalem, or to the places belonging to it, whether they owe the king money or are there for any other reason, let them be set free, and let their property be safe. I also give you permission to repair and rebuild your temple, and let all of it be done at my expense. I also allow you to build the walls of your city and to erect high towers, and let them be erected at my expense. If there is any fortified town that it would be useful for the Jewish country to have very strong, let it also be built at my expense. These were the things Demetrius promised and granted to the Jews by this letter. But King Alexander raised a large army of mercenary soldiers, together with those from Syria who deserted to him, and made an expedition against Demetrius. When battle was joined, Demetrius's left wing put the troops opposing them to flight, pursued them a long distance, killed many of them, and plundered their camp. But the right wing, where Demetrius himself happened to be, was defeated, and all the rest fled. Demetrius fought bravely and killed many of the enemy, but while he was pursuing the others, his horse carried him into a deep bog, from which it was difficult to get out. There, when his horse fell, Demetrius could not escape being killed. When his enemies saw what had happened to him, they turned back, surrounded him, and all threw their darts at him. Demetrius was now on foot, but he fought courageously. At last he received so many wounds that he could no longer stand under them, and he fell. This was the end that Demetrius came to after he had reigned 11 years, as we have related elsewhere. Onias, the son of Onias the high priest and bearing the same name as his father, had fled to King Ptolemy, called Philometor, and was now living at Alexandria, as I have already said. When this Onias saw that Judea was being oppressed by the Macedonians and their kings, he wanted to win a lasting memorial and everlasting fame for himself. So he decided to write to King Ptolemy and Queen Cleopatra, asking permission to build a temple in Egypt like the one at Jerusalem, and to appoint Levites and priests from his own family line. His main reason for wanting to do this was his trust in the prophet Isaiah, who had lived more than 600 years earlier, and had foretold that a temple would certainly be built in Egypt for Almighty God by a man who was a Jew. Encouraged by this prophecy, Onias wrote the following letter to Ptolemy and Cleopatra. I have done many great things for you in the affairs of the war, with God's help, both in Cilicia and in Phoenicia. At last I came with the Jews to Leontopolis and to other places belonging to your nation. There I found that most of your people had temples in an improper way, and that because of this they were hostile to one another. This is what happens among the Egyptians because they have so many temples and hold different opinions about divine worship. Now I have found a very suitable place in a fortress that takes its name from the country Diana. This place is full of many kinds of materials and is stocked with sacred animals. Therefore I ask you to grant me permission to cleanse this holy place, which belongs to no master and has fallen into ruin, and to build there a temple to Almighty God, patterned after the one at Jerusalem and with the same dimensions. This will be for the benefit of you, your wife, and your children, so that the Jews who live in Egypt may have a place where they can come together in mutual harmony with one another and be useful to your interests. For the prophet Isaiah foretold that there should be an altar in Egypt to the Lord God. Onias also mentioned many other things that Isaiah had prophesied concerning that place. This, then, was what Onias wrote to King Ptolemy. Anyone may see the piety of the king and of his sister and wife Cleopatra from the letter they wrote in answer to him, because they placed the blame in any violation of the law on Onias himself. Their reply was as follows. King Ptolemy and Queen Cleopatra send greetings to Onias. We have read your petition, in which you ask to be allowed to cleanse the temple that has fallen down at Leontopolis in the Nomus of Heliopolis, and that is named from the country Bubastes. For this reason we cannot help wondering how it could be pleasing to God for a temple to be built in a place so unclean and so full of sacred animals. But since you say that Isaiah the prophet foretold this long ago, we give you permission to do it, provided it can be done according to your law, and so that we may not appear in any way to have offended God in this matter. So Onias took possession of the place and built a temple and an altar to God. It was indeed like the temple at Jerusalem, but it was smaller and poorer. I do not think it proper now to describe its dimensions or its vessels, since I have already described them in my 7th book of the Wars of the Jews. Onias, however, found other Jews like himself, along with priests and Levites, who performed the divine service there. But enough has now been said about this temple. At this time the Alexandrian Jews and the Samaritans who worshipped at the temple built in the days of Alexander on Mount Gerizim fell into a dispute with one another. They argued about their temples before Ptolemy himself. The Jews said that, according to the laws of Moses, the temple had to be built at Jerusalem. The Samaritans said that it had to be built at Gerizim. So they asked the king to sit with his friends, hear the arguments about these matters, and punish with death whichever side was defeated. Sabius and Theodosius presented the argument for the Samaritans, while Andronicus, the son of Meselamus, argued for the people of Jerusalem. They swore an oath by God and the king that they would make their proofs according to the law, and they asked Ptolemy to put to death anyone he found to have violated what they had sworn. Accordingly, the king brought several of his friends into the council and sat down to hear what the advocates had to say. The Jews at Alexandria were deeply anxious for the men whose task it was to defend the temple at Jerusalem, for they were greatly offended that anyone should try to take away the honor of that temple, which was so ancient and so famous throughout the inhabited world. When Sabius and Theodosius allowed Andronicus to speak first, he began to prove his case from the law and from the succession of the high priests. He showed how each high priest had received that dignity and succession from his father, and how they had ruled over the temple. He also showed how all the kings of Asia had honored the temple with their donations, and with the most splendid gifts dedicated to it. As for the temple at Gerizim, he treated it as nothing and spoke of it as though it had never existed. By this speech and by other arguments, Andronicus persuaded the king to decide that the temple at Jerusalem had been built according to the laws of Moses, and to put Sabius and Theodosius to death. These were the events that happened to the Jews at Alexandria in the days of Ptolemy Philometor. After Demetrius had been killed in battle, as described earlier, Alexander took possession of the kingdom of Syria. He wrote to Ptolemy Philometor and asked to marry his daughter. He said it was only right that he should become related by marriage to Ptolemy, since he had now received the rule that had belonged to his forefathers, had been raised to it by God's providence, had conquered Demetrius, and was in other respects not unworthy of such a connection. Ptolemy gladly accepted the proposal. He wrote back, congratulating Alexander on receiving the principality of his ancestors, and promised to give him his daughter in marriage. He assured him that he was coming to meet him at Ptolemais, and asked Alexander to meet him there, because he would bring his daughter from Egypt as far as that city, and would marry her to him there. After sending this letter, Ptolemy quickly came to Ptolemais and brought his daughter Cleopatra with him. Alexander was already there, as Ptolemy had requested. Ptolemy then gave him his daughter in marriage, and gave her a dowry of silver and gold as large as was fitting for such a king to give. When the wedding was over, Alexander wrote to Jonathan the high priest and asked him to come to Ptolemais. Jonathan came to the kings and brought them magnificent gifts, and both of them honored him. Alexander also made him take off his own garment and put on a purple one, and seated him beside himself on his throne. Then he ordered his captains to go with Jonathan into the middle of the city and proclaim that no one was permitted to speak against him or cause him any trouble. When the captains had done this, the men who had prepared accusations against Jonathan, and who hated him, saw the honor shown to him by public proclamation and by the king's command. They ran away, fearing that some harm might come upon them. King Alexander was so kind to Jonathan that he enrolled him as the chief of his friends. Then in the 165th year Demetrius, the son of Demetrius, came from Crete with a large body of mercenary soldiers, which Lasthenes the Cretan had brought to him, and sailed to Cilicia. When Alexander heard this, he was thrown into great anxiety and confusion. He immediately hurried out of Phoenicia and came to Antioch, so that he could put affairs there into a secure condition before Demetrius arrived. He left Apollonius Daus as governor of Celesyria. Apollonius came to Jamnia with a large army and sent a message to Jonathan the high priest. He told him that it was not right for Jonathan alone to live in peace and authority, without being subject to the king. He said this had made him a disgrace in the eyes of everyone, because he had not yet brought Jonathan under the king's power. Do not deceive yourself, then, by sitting quietly among the mountains and pretending that you have forces with you. If you trust in your strength, come down into the plain and let our armies be compared with each other. The result of the battle will show which of us is the braver. But understand this, the bravest men from every city are in my army, and these are the very men who have always defeated your ancestors. Let us fight in a part of the country where we can use weapons, not stones, and where those who are beaten will have no place to run." Jonathan was angered by this message. He chose 10,000 of his soldiers and quickly left Jerusalem with his brother Simon. He came to Joppa and pitched his camp outside the city, because the people of Joppa had shut their gates against him, since Apollonius had placed a garrison in the city. But when Jonathan prepared to besiege them, they became afraid that he would take the city by force, so they opened the gates to him. When Apollonius heard that Jonathan had taken Joppa, he took 3,000 horsemen and 8,000 footmen and came to Ashdod. From there he moved away, traveling quietly and slowly. Then, coming up toward Joppa, he acted as though he were retreating from the place, and in this way drew Jonathan into the plain. Apollonius put great confidence in his cavalry, and his chief hope of victory rested on them. Jonathan, however, came out and pursued Apollonius as far as Ashdod. As soon as Apollonius saw that his enemy was in the plain, he turned back and gave battle. Apollonius had placed 1,000 horsemen in ambush in a valley, so that they would appear to the enemy behind them. When Jonathan noticed this, he was not frightened. He ordered his army to stand in a square formation, and commanded them to attack the enemy on both sides, and to face those who came at them from both front and rear. The battle lasted until evening. Jonathan gave part of his forces to his brother Simon, and ordered him to attack the enemy. As for Jonathan himself, he commanded the men with him to cover themselves with their armor and receive the darts of the horsemen. They did as they were ordered. The enemy's cavalry kept throwing their darts until they had no more left, but they did Jonathan's men no harm, because the darts did not pierce their bodies. They struck the shields, which were joined closely together, and the tightness of that formation easily overcame the force of the darts, so that they flew off without effect. When the enemy grew slack in throwing their darts, after continuing from morning until late in the day, Simon saw that they were tired and fell upon the body of troops in front of him. Because his soldiers showed great eagerness, he put the enemy to flight. When the horsemen saw the footmen running away, they did not stand their ground either. They were worn out by the long battle, which had lasted until evening, and all their hope in the footmen was gone. So they shamefully fled in great confusion, until they were separated from one another and scattered over the whole plain. Jonathan pursued them as far as Ashdod and killed many of them. He forced the rest, despairing of escape, to flee to the temple of Dagon, which was in Ashdod. But Jonathan took the city at the first assault and burned it, together with the villages around it. He did not spare the temple of Dagon itself, but burned that also and destroyed those who had fled into it. The whole number of the enemy who fell in the battle and were consumed in the temple was 8,000. After Jonathan had defeated so great an army, he left Ashdod and came to Ascalon. When he pitched his camp outside the city, the people of Ascalon came out to meet him, bringing gifts of hospitality and showing him honor. He accepted their goodwill and returned from there to Jerusalem with a great amount of plunder, which he had taken after conquering his enemies. When Alexander heard that Apollonius, the general of his army, had been defeated, he pretended to be glad, because Apollonius had fought against Jonathan, his friend and ally, contrary to his orders. So Alexander sent to Jonathan, bore witness to his merit, and gave him honors as rewards, including a golden button, the sort that it was customary to give to the king's kinsman. He also granted him Ekron and its toparchy as his own inheritance. About the same time, King Ptolemy, who was called Philometor, led an army to Syria to help Alexander, his son-in-law. Part of his army traveled by sea and part by land. All the cities received him willingly, as Alexander had commanded them to do, and escorted him as far as Ashdod. There they all cried out loudly with complaints about the temple of Dagon, which had been burned. They accused Jonathan of laying it waste, destroying the neighboring country by fire, and killing a large number of their people. Ptolemy heard these accusations but said nothing. Jonathan also went to meet Ptolemy as far as Joppa, and received from him splendid gifts of hospitality, along with every mark of honor. After Jonathan had escorted him as far as the river called Eleutherus, he returned again to Jerusalem. While Ptolemy was at Ptolemais, he came very close to being destroyed in a way he had not expected. Alexander had plotted against his life through Onias, who was Alexander's friend. The treachery was clear, so Ptolemy wrote to Alexander and demanded that he bring Onias to the punishment he deserved. He explained the traps Onias had laid for him and asked that Onias be punished for them. But when Alexander did not do what Ptolemy demanded, Ptolemy understood that Alexander himself was the one who had planned the plot, and he became very angry with him. Alexander had already been on very bad terms with the people of Antioch, because they had suffered greatly because of him. In the end, however, Onias did receive the punishment his arrogant crimes deserved. He was killed in a disgraceful way, like a woman, while he was trying to hide himself in women's clothing, as we have related elsewhere. After this, Ptolemy blamed himself for having given his daughter in marriage to Alexander, and for making an alliance with him to help him against Demetrius. So he broke off his connection with Alexander, took his daughter away from him, and immediately sent messengers to Demetrius, offering to make an alliance of mutual help and friendship with him. He also agreed to give him his daughter in marriage, and to restore him to the rule of his fathers. Demetrius was very pleased with this message, and accepted both Ptolemy's help and the marriage with his daughter. But Ptolemy still had one difficult task left. He had to persuade the people of Antioch to receive Demetrius, because they were deeply angry with him on account of the injuries his father Demetrius had done them. Yet Ptolemy succeeded in this also. Since the people of Antioch hated Alexander because of Onias, as we have already shown, they were easily persuaded to drive him out of Antioch. After Alexander was expelled from Antioch, he went into Cilicia. Ptolemy then came to Antioch, where both the inhabitants and the army made him king. As a result, he was forced to wear 2 diadems, one for Asia and the other for Egypt. But he was by nature a good and just man, and did not desire what belonged to others. Along with these qualities, he was also wise in thinking about what might happen in the future, and he decided to avoid provoking the envy of the Romans. So he called the people of Antioch together in an assembly, and persuaded them to receive Demetrius. He assured them that Demetrius would not remember what they had done to his father, if they would now place him under obligation to them. Ptolemy also undertook to be a good adviser and governor to Demetrius himself, and promised that he would not allow him to attempt any evil actions. As for himself, he said he was satisfied with the kingdom of Egypt. By this speech he persuaded the people of Antioch to receive Demetrius. But Alexander quickly gathered a large and powerful army, came out of Cilicia into Syria, and burned and plundered the territory belonging to Antioch. Because of this, Ptolemy and his son-in-law Demetrius brought their army against him, for Ptolemy had already given his daughter to Demetrius in marriage. They defeated Alexander and put him to flight, and he escaped into Arabia. During the battle, Ptolemy's horse heard the noise of an elephant, threw him from its back, and cast him to the ground. When his enemies saw this accident, they attacked him, wounded him many times in the head, and put his life in danger. When his guards picked him up, he was so badly hurt that for 4 days he could neither understand nor speak. Meanwhile Zabdiel, a prince among the Arabians, cut off Alexander's head and sent it to Ptolemy. On the 5th day, when Ptolemy was recovering from his wounds and had regained his understanding, he at once heard a most pleasing report and saw a most pleasing sight, the death of Alexander and Alexander's head. Yet not long after this joy over Alexander's death, which had satisfied him so greatly, Ptolemy also died. Alexander, who was called Bala, had reigned over Asia for 5 years, as we have related elsewhere. When Demetrius, who was called Nicator, had taken the kingdom, he acted so wickedly toward Ptolemy's soldiers that he treated them very harshly. He did not remember the alliance of mutual help between them, nor that he was Ptolemy's son-in-law and relative through his marriage to Cleopatra. So the soldiers fled from his cruel treatment to Alexandria, though Demetrius kept the elephants. But Jonathan the high priest raised an army from all Judea and attacked the citadel at Jerusalem, laying siege to it. The place was held by a garrison of Macedonians, along with some of those wicked men who had abandoned the customs of their forefathers. At first these men despised Jonathan's attempts to take the place, trusting in its strength. But some of those wicked men went out by night, came to Demetrius, and told him that the citadel was under siege. Demetrius was angered by what he heard, took his army, and came from Antioch against Jonathan. When Demetrius was at Antioch, he wrote to Jonathan and ordered him to come quickly to him at Ptolemy. Jonathan did not stop the siege of the citadel. Instead, he took with him the elders of the people and the priests and brought gold, silver, garments, and many gifts of friendship. He came to Demetrius, presented these gifts to him, and by doing so calmed the king's anger. Demetrius honored him and confirmed him in the high priesthood, which he had held by the grants of the kings who had ruled before him. When the Jewish deserters accused Jonathan, Demetrius was so far from believing them that he granted Jonathan's petition. Jonathan asked that Demetrius demand no more than 300 talents as tribute for all Judea and for the 3 toparchies of Samaria, Perea, and Galilee. Demetrius accepted this proposal and gave him a letter confirming all these grants. King Demetrius sends greetings to Jonathan his brother, and to the nation of the Jews. We have sent you a copy of the letter that we have written to Lasthenes our kinsman, so that you may know what it contains. King Demetrius sends greetings to Lasthenes our father. I have decided to give thanks and show favor to the nation of the Jews, because it has observed the rules of justice in matters concerning us. Accordingly, I released to them the 3 prefectures, Ephraim, Lydda, and Ramatha, which have been added to Judea from Samaria, together with everything belonging to them. I also release what the kings before me received from those who offered sacrifices in Jerusalem, as well as what is due from the fruits of the earth and of the trees, and anything else that belongs to us, including the salt pits and the crowns that used to be presented to us. From now on and forever, they shall not be compelled to pay any of those taxes. Therefore see to it that a copy of this letter is made, given to Jonathan, and set up in a prominent place in their holy temple." These were the contents of the writing. Now when Demetrius saw that there was peace everywhere, and that there was no danger and no fear of war, he dismissed the greater part of his army and reduced their pay. He kept in paid service only the foreigners who had come up with him from Crete and from the other islands. This, however, brought him resentment and hatred from the soldiers, since from that time on he gave them nothing. The kings before him had continued paying them in peacetime as they had previously done, so that they would keep the soldiers' goodwill, and so that the soldiers would be very ready to endure the hardships of war whenever the need arose.
And there we will pause, with Jonathan at the height of his power and prestige playing the great kings against each other with real skill. But that game has a deadly downside. When you are valuable to everyone, you are a target for everyone. Next time, in part 2, a new strongman rises in Syria, Trypho, who sees Jonathan as the one obstacle to his ambitions, and removes him by the blackest treachery, and Jonathan's brother Simon, the last of the Maccabee brothers, takes the helm and wins at last the thing they had all fought for, independence. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly. And before the lamp goes out, a small request. If something tonight taught you, or surprised you, or simply delighted you, do leave a comment and tell me what it was. And if there is a work, an author, or a tale you should like me to take up next, set it down there as well. I read every one, and many an episode has begun its life as a viewer's suggestion. Until next time.